Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Hada Molecha Lot 1 Wash Processed Ethiopia from Junto Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Junto, based out of Taylor, South Carolina, and they were a suggestion to us by Zach, so shout out to and thank you to Zach for the suggestion. Now, they're a coffee roaster I had never heard of before. Zach's friend Juniper got a job with this company, so shout out to Juniper as well if she's watching. I'm looking forward to discussing my first full bag experience of one of their coffees, as this right here is day 28. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a more medium fine grind. However, we'll discuss the grind a little bit more throughout this video. Roast profile is also interesting because this coffee is roasted really light, definitely lighter than a lot of American coffees, so it has that light American for the roast profile. Keep that in mind throughout this video as well. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 12, first impression. They do list on their bags that you wait at least 2 weeks, but I needed to start this coffee a little earlier than normal. So we began on day 12, and it's definitely had a more delicate experience than initially expected. It's reminiscent to me of Manhattan's Genji Shala, a coffee that we had recently reviewed on this channel as well, in the sense that it feels like this honey berry tea with a slight bit of this darker berry aspect to it. Similar to the Genji Shala in that sense, maybe a little less vibrant, but as a result, it was a little too tame, left an okay first impression, but I said, hey, we started this coffee a little early, so definitely potential for it to improve from here. Day 14, second impression, and the coffee again feels tea-like honey-based cup with a little bit of this slightly herbal foresty berry component to it as well. There's a slight bit more sweetness to the cup, but it continues to skew a lot more in the tame tea-like aspect. And it's upon this second impression, it was present in the first one as well. I was wondering if there was maybe some issues with my grinding, as my grinder didn't have any other issues, and people ask about the grinder all the time. I use a Virtuoso Plus. I don't have issues grinding most coffees, but I had so many issues grinding this coffee as there were so many fines. There were more fines coming from this coffee than I think any other coffee that we've ever reviewed on this channel. So that, as a result, definitely had an impact on the overall brew of this coffee. So that's kind of tricky because the Virtuoso Plus is better than most grinders that most people use. So the fact that it was having issues grinding this coffee was already a little bit of a detracting point, as I feel like it greatly impacted the overall results of this coffee. Day 16, continuing to see a slight increase in terms of the vibrancy, as there's some more subtle fruit components to the cup. There's a slight tart berry complemented by the subtle citrus and an ever so slight apricot. It's mostly still floral forward, it's mostly still tame, it's mostly still tea-like, it's still just such a kind of tame cup of coffee in general. Day 18, continuing to see an increase in the vibrancy overall. So I felt that part of it was giving it a little bit more time, but I also felt that part of it was the fact that I couldn't really get this coffee to grind right, and as a result, anytime the cup was finished brewing, I could see that the coffee itself was coming out lighter than normal. So there were so many issues brewing this coffee, no matter what adjustments I actually made with the grind. I couldn't really remedy this situation. There were just too many fines every single time I did. Floral honey base with the cup as well, slightly tea-like, and there's a little bit of depth, but for the most part, it's just a subtle coffee in general, and I'm still attributing it to those additional factors. Day 20, not too much of a shift from the previous experience, as I'm still having difficulty pulling out sweetness from the cup. It remains really tame, and that was a huge issue with me as well, was I really wanted this cup to have a lot more sweetness. Something I've heard this year as well has been that washed Ethiopians in general have been on the less sweet side of things as a whole. So that could be in line with that aspect. However, I still was just having a little bit more difficulty getting a lot more of the sweetness that I wanted. A touch more honey, sweetness to complement the herbal berry tea yet again. Day 24. Not much of a change, although I'm starting to experience a little bit more depth to this cup, as on this day I was able to get the slight floral cookie sweetness from the cup, which was quite nice. Best aspect to this coffee to this point. In addition to that, there's a slight bit of this apple-like finish, actually reminding me of a red apple in terms of flavor itself. So those were two positive aspects I was able to pick up with a little bit more time. And the final note I have, day 26, not seeing too much of a shift still, as 26 hasn't been too much different from day 12, seeing very slight incremental increases in the overall vibrancy and sweetness of the cup, with just a slight bit more depth as the cup continues to skew a lot more in that floral honey direction. It does have a little bit more of this honeysuckle than I'd experienced before, so getting even more floral aspects to this cup, but for the most part, still overall kind of tame and tea-like cup. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, and 3 level 4, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness, level 4, it's still a really clean cup of coffee, and I think you can kind of attribute that to the fact that it still is just a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. I don't want to knock it for any sort of clarity, because it definitely had clarity, even if the flavors weren't overly pronounced in it. Finish, level 4. That being said, it did have a nice little honeyed finish to it, and I know that's a little generous on the level 4, but it is lasting, especially for how tame the cup of coffee is in general, so I feel like that's justified there at that level 4 mark. Florals, level 4. I feel like throughout the entire time drinking this coffee, the florals were the most dominant aspect for me. I feel like the flavor notes I have listed on here are a cherry blossom and a jasmine. And I could definitely see the jasmine. For me, it was a little bit more of the kind of floral honey, floral cookie, as well as the honeysuckle component. So all of those definitely feel justified for the florality being at that level 4 mark, most dominant factor in this coffee. Couple of level 3, so the berry fruit level 3. Yeah, the berry at times, especially earlier in this coffee, was very reminiscent of Manhattan's Genji Shala, that more dark berry base to it, but not anything in an overly pronounced manner, more like a berry tea sort of aspect. Citrus level 3. Citrus was in equal abundance in terms of the fruit profiles that I was getting from this coffee, so I feel like that one right there is justified. In addition to that, that slight kind of apple I was getting from the cup too. Sweetness level 3, obviously I had to address that at some point. Yeah, I think by the end, at the best, I could justify that level 3 mark, even if it is just kind of there in the middle of that level 3. I really wish this coffee was sweeter. I feel like if I was able to get these flavor profiles in a more defined sense and aspect with some additional sweetness, this coffee would have been a lot more enjoyable for me. But for the most part, it still felt like a more tame cup of coffee. Body level 3. Yeah, especially when brewed through the V60, it had a little bit more body than I think I was expecting to, and a slight bit of herbality, hence what you're seeing in the savoriness as well as the spice. So I actually really like the way this tasting wheel looks. I think for the most part, it's a pretty accurate representation, even if it does show things a little bit more higher than I experienced from this coffee. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions from this coffee. I oftentimes say that I wish a coffee was a little bit more light in terms of the development. This is on the other side of things. I wish they'd maybe just push this one a little bit more, because I feel like there are some great flavors within this coffee. However, it just came out so light the entire time I was drinking it, and having so many issues because the coffee came out really dense, and the issues with the grinding made it so hard to get this coffee right. And I know I didn't get this coffee right, but at the same time, it's because it was out of my hands, honestly. Unless I got a really nice, more expensive grinder, that's kind of the only way I feel like I could have ever remedied or fixed the situation that was coming from this coffee. So this one's a really tricky one. It's a little bit more subtle, it's a little bit more tame, and I've always said that the sweetness at a level 3 oftentimes is a sticking point for me, so it kind of was in the case of this coffee. Therefore, it wasn't necessarily my favorite Ethiopia. But the type of person I would suggest this coffee to is somebody that likes their really, really delicate, really, really tame tea-like cups of coffee, because this one had all of these flavors in a more delicate tea-like base to it. It did remind me a fair bit of the Genji Shala, but in a slightly less vibrant manner, which that coffee to begin with wasn't necessarily the most vibrant coffee. So I think keep those things in mind, keep a more light profile in mind, but for the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Hada Molecha, Lot 1, Wash Processed Ethiopia from Junto Coffee. Thank you for watching.